Welcome to another episode of Ride Ready Between the Years. I'm Brittany from Stable and Grounded Performance and Wellbeing Consulting and Coaching. And today I'm going to talk about the topic when people talk about, how to regulate your emotions in a competition environment or in general. I get spoken to a lot about speaking to teenage girls about how, they hold themselves and behave at competitions and how they work with those people around them, how they treat people around them, including their parents, their coaches, and their horse. What I have noticed is in the work that I do with people is it's almost like emotional regulation is starting to become a buzzword, right? And oh, you just need more emotional regulation. And when I started this business in a slightly different avenue, people were trying to put that into copy on a website and stuff. And I was like, for a lot of people, I think it's probably quite condescending to be told, oh, you just need more emotional regulation. It's like saying all kids these days don't have resilience. I find that pretty offensive, especially the amount of things that I've gone through in my life to hear people say, oh, kids these days, although I don't think I'm a kid anymore. But nonetheless, that's rabbit hole number one for today. What I have found with a lot of people is we're all talking about emotional regulation strategies, and a lot of people don't know, like, how can we regulate our emotions if we can't label them and we also don't know what the feeling is? Okay. So it's all good and well to say that person needs to regulate their emotions, but can we actually even name the emotions? And I've worked with people, they've got multidisciplinary teams and, behavior consultants and all this kind of stuff. And they've got all these strategies about emotional regulation. And then we go through, and one of the most beautiful ways to teach people emotions in general is teaching people emotions with horses. So an activity for this week is to spend just 5 minutes out in the paddock as you go to feed them, something like that, and just looking at your horses, either engaging with each other or engaging in you, and just trying to pull out what emotions you can see in those horses. And what happens is, I think there's actually, is it 250 emotions or something? Probably should have checked that before I started recording. And I think there was a study done by Brené Brown, and they found that we actually only really work with about 7 to 12. And we are also better at saying I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm pissed off, those kind of things. And it's like, I'm happy, but or I'm not happy. There's so many other kind of emotions in there. And I think that we can't yet talk about the concept of emotional regulation if we can't yet start with emotions. And then to take it one step even further in kind of a parenting context is how we support those around us to feel safe to be able to express them, and our response when people do express that. I know there was a period of life, or maybe it was a season I was in, and the people I used to hang out with, and it just got really to this point, I call it toxic positivity, because it's almost people are trying to do a level of CBT, right? And they're trying to say things are a positive spin. And it's actually just quite condescending and taking away and not even empathetic towards the person that's going through something. Oh, but you just need to think positively. Absolutely doesn't do us any justice, doesn't help us move through the emotions. And what it actually does over time is teaching people that it's actually not okay or not, publicly acceptable to talk about those things. So how does emotional regulation actually relate to riding? In the purpose of this context, I wanted to talk about it in where we actually start, because we can't talk about emotional regulation if we can't name the emotions. We can't name the emotions, or we don't feel safe to feel the emotions. And I challenge you, you may be a parent listening to this and you may be thinking about your kids, but what about yourself? How many emotions will we have throughout a day of those 250? How many do we allow ourselves to feel? Because what happens is we start to be able to label the emotion and feel the emotion, and then just work with a little bit of curiosity and say, okay, but what's going on and what's behind that? And I'm finding that the more people engage in therapy, the more like people are using terminology, like people say, oh, I have anxiety. And I was working with someone once to say, oh, I have anxiety. Uh, and what we actually went through was, and they had these strategies for anxiety, and we developed the strategies for anxiety. And then we started actually to be like, well, what does that actually look like? And what we actually found was it was actually overstimulated. So all the strategies for anxiety weren't really going to work because it wasn't actually anxiety. And people will come and say, oh, I have anxiety and I have this and I have that. But what does that actually mean? How does it show up? Because if we don't know what it means for you, we don't know how it shows up, we don't know how it impacts us, we can't do anything with that. It's just like saying, like, I have a nose. Sure. Now what? What does that mean? Like, okay, like I have a nose, but actually, I can't breathe out of one side. Okay, well, how does that impact you? Okay, what does that mean? Okay, for training, what does that mean? So before we go on a big tangent in a different episode around kind of emotional regulation and how we can build those skills, we need to start at the basics and we need to allow ourselves. And, I work with parents who bring their kids here and they say, well, teach my kid emotions. Cool. So what do you do? What does dad do? What does the household look like? Are we saying, I'm feeling a little bit anxious, and then we might go, oh, I'm feeling a bit yucky in my belly, depending which age range you're working with. We all need to be working on that if we just expect our kids to be able to do it, right? And it sounds a little wanky, but we can't just expect kids or other people to be able to know how to do it if we're also not demonstrating it. So I apologize, my dog's drinking water, if you can hear that. So the point where that leads to is it's not just something that you can just say, oh, go and like read a page of a textbook for this. It's something that has to be embodied, embraced, and practiced. And then what I would encourage people to then take one step further once they're able to start with, oh, I'm feeling happy, I'm feeling sad. There's a lot of power in I am statements. And beyond that level, our body responds faster than our prefrontal cortex that makes decisions in our brain. And we then can go to, well, where do we feel that in our body? What does that look like? Does stress look like tight shoulders? Does it look like walking around like kind of this? Like when we can notice it in our bodies first, that can be an earlier sign that when you want to talk about intervention strategies and how to intervene before people respond, noticing it where it happens in our body first before it even becomes to the forefront of our brain to become a full kind of thought which turns into an emotion. We can feel that in our body and look at, well, what's signaling that, get curious, what's causing that, and then what might we be able to do with that, which we can go into later. But just start, if this is a concept to you where you're like, hang on a minute, like I think that actually might be me. Start by going out in your backyard or next time you're at your agistment and having a look at your horse and start looking at the range of different emotions that they express. Write them down in your notes or write it down on a piece of paper and start there. That's how I teach people the basics. It's much easier to talk about someone else than it is to talk about yourself. Give that a go and let me know if you've got any questions.